Hello and welcome to this video on competitive tendering. So in this video we're going to look at the process of competitive tendering for government contracts. So we should be aware that there are a number of public sector services and national utilities. So for example, public sector services would include things like schools and hospitals. National utilities might be things like water companies and electricity providers. By public sector, we mean that they are owned ultimately by the state. Now, often the running of a school or the running of a hospital is really just the aggregation of many different services combined. So providing the medicine, operating the ambulances in a school, providing the staff, providing the books, providing the equipment, and likewise for water companies and electricity companies. And often we want to try and encourage competition even when we have the government as the sole provider. So what can the government do to try and encourage competition to improve efficiency in these sectors? Well, the answer might be to go through what's known as competitive tendering. Competitive tendering is when the government invites private firms to bid for a contract to produce a good or provide a service. And when the government do this, when they spend money, we call this government procurement. So if we go back to the example of our hospital, they might say actually one of the functions of a hospital is to provide this service here, the ambulances. So they can drive, collect patients and bring them to the hospital. Now, if we provide this ourselves, we buy the ambulances and we do it ourselves. As the public sector, that might not, there's no competition there. So we're not likely to get the most efficient outcome. What we could do is we could invite private companies. We could invite private companies to bid to us for the right to provide this service. So we might say, okay, we now have 3 different companies who are trying to get paid to provide this service of running the ambulances. So they might come with different bids, different amounts of money to provide the ambulances, and we can then say, right, well this one we'd only have to pay them £286, for example, to provide the service per day or whatever it might be, compared to the other ones. So this is a much more efficient outcome. We've really reduced the cost of running the hospital here because we've used this process of competitive tendering. The government might also use it, for example, to procure things like fighter jets for the Air Force. Rather than building the fighter jets ourselves as a government, we might invite private firms, Lockheed, Boeing, whoever it might be, to bid, say, right, this is the price that we will charge to provide these fighter jets. We'd like to get more choice, a lower price, and perhaps a more efficient outcome. So the firm bidding the lowest cost, subject to meeting certain quality requirements, will often win the contract. The aim is to drive down costs and improve efficiency in state-funded organisations. This includes central governments and also local councils as well. So how does this process work, competitive tendering? Well, let's go through this as a diagram that illustrates some of the processes involved. We'll go through some of them. You don't need to take all of these down, but number one, the government agency, for example, the hospital, will form a procurement team. So people who are going to specify exactly the service or the good that's required. So step 2 is they will then develop what's known as the tender document. So specifying exactly what service or good we want, and also how we're going to decide the evaluation criteria, how we're going to decide which is the best private firm. They will then issue this maybe over their website or in a particular industry magazine. Hopefully they will get some people who submit bids and they will do some initial evaluations, decide which are the best options. Then they'll invite those firms to come and make some presentations about their particular bids. Ultimately, we'll then select the best one, often the lowest cost, subject to meeting specific quality requirements. There may be a period of negotiation, but then finally we award them with the contract to provide that particular service or good for the government. Let's have a look at an example here. Now this, I appreciate, is quite faint, but this has come from a public utility. This has come from Pakistan Railways, and they have issued here a tender notice. So they're saying, rather than doing it ourselves, we would like private companies to think of innovative ways to do this. We'd like you to come and bid and say, this is how much we want to be charged to, how much we want to charge to provide this particular service. And then we have some sort of competition. We can pick the cheapest one. So some items here. They want a high-speed flat rail track, and they've got some different categories here. So as a private company, you might see this and decide, yes, we manufacture those items. Let's make a bid. What do we think is the best bid we can charge them? However many dollars or whatever it is, we're going to charge for those items. And then the Pakistan Railways can look at this and decide which one they think is perhaps the best. There is a quote here further up for some bitumen, so some tarmacking. Again, tarmac companies might look at this and decide, should we bid and what's the best price that we can offer. We've got here PVC adhesive, even leather gloves are part of this tender. Now, a little bit further down the bottom, we can see that tender documents here can be obtained from the Pakistan Railway Company. Any questions should be directed to that particular company. And bidders are required to submit their bids within 90 days. And they will be then informed whether they've been successful, and contracts would be issued. So Pakistan Railways, or the government, the hospital or the school or the water company, will need to evaluate, decide which tender is the best. And they might split it that actually 30% of the overall decision is based on the best price, and maybe the other 70% of the decision would be based on other issues like technical solution, the service, the quality, the impact on the environment, the social value. We try and evaluate each bid that we receive from private companies on each category and give them a score, and then overall we'll have a final score for each company, and we might say the company with the highest score out of 100 wins that contract, and we pay them to provide that service or to provide that good for the government. So a good example would be railways. Government often will own the track and ask for companies to bid to run the trains. So for example here, a private company, Virgin, have been successful in bidding to run the trains on the government-owned track, and the government would assess bids from Virgin or Stagecoach or whoever other providers might be, and they'll base it maybe on quality as well as price and say, yes, we think this is the best option. And it's a way of introducing competition into the marketplace. So, in evaluation, what are the advantages of this approach? Well, often the public sector, because it doesn't have a profit incentive and there's no competition, is often accused of being bureaucratic, lots of red tape and inefficient. Whereas private sector companies are often efficient and incentivized to minimize costs because they can make a profit. Because we have some bidding between competitors, we're likely to get a lower price and a more efficient outcome. Private sector companies may often provide more innovative ideas and solutions if we have quite an open-ended tender. Any negatives to this process? Well, what if the private company fails to meet the quality or the specifications of the contract that we've set out? Then this could leave us with some problems. Maybe only a small number of firms will bid for the contract, so we don't really get much competition, so it's not particularly low cost or good quality. It could be questioned whether the government really do want to maximize consumer welfare, and the government may just accept the best bid without thinking fully about the impacts on consumers. there may be the risk that the bidders for the contract collude between them, and so actually the quotes that they make to the government are all very similar or higher than they might otherwise be if there was a proper competitive process. Private firms may be exploiting workers in order to charge such low prices to the government for that particular good or service. And again, from the government's perspective, this would be a bit of an unintended consequence and not really what we want to achieve. So in this video, we've looked at the process of competitive tendering for government contracts. That's it. Thanks very much for listening.